Hello and welcome to yet another session. This is the second lecture on incorporating risk in project, the statistical tools to handle risk. We will now understand the statistical tools of incorporating risk. In the earlier session, we have discussed traditional methods of handling risk in projects. As per trend, a project manager should adopt statistical tools in analysis and interpretation of risk with regard to project. In this discussion, we are going to discuss the statistical tools like probability distribution, including dependent, independent, and decision tree techniques, project termination and abandonment analysis. Let us first discuss simple probability analysis. This is one of the most effective and sound tools of appraising project in case of uncertainty. The basic underlying assumptions on which this model has been developed are that there is an array of potential future returns. Managers know the probability of each of such possible future returns. Thus, the difficulties encountered by managers in assigning probabilities to such an array of potential future returns may be regarded as the potential limitation of estimating such probabilities with a reasonable degree of accuracy. It goes without saying that this model enjoys the inherent advantage of being based on a foundation that is conceptually extremely strong. The major advantage of simple probability analysis is its simplicity in execution. On the other hand, owing to the difficulty in assigning the exact probability under different options may be the main drawback. Now, let us move on to the next tool. Do you know what is standard deviation for risk analysis? The assignment of probabilities and the calculation of the expected net present value include risk into the investment decision, but a better insight into the risk analysis of capital budgeting decision is possible by calculating standard deviation and coefficient of variation. Now, let us understand standard deviation. Standard deviation is an absolute measure of risk analysis, and it can be used when projects under consideration are having same cash outlay. Statistically, standard deviation is the square root of variance, and variance measures the deviation about expected cash flow of each of the possible cash flows. Variance can be calculated using the equation that you see on the screen, where n is the number of states, Pi is the probability of state I, Ri is the return on the stock in state I, and ER is the expected return on the stock. You can see how the standard deviation is calculated. Let us see the coefficient of variation. If the projects to be compared involving different outlays, different expected value, the coefficient of variation is the correct choice, being a relative measure. The formula is coefficient of variation is equal to standard deviation of the investment divided by the expected return on the investment. The advantages. The advantages are that we can know the higher the coefficient of variation, the riskier the project. It is a better measure of the uncertainty of cash flow returns than the standard deviation because it adjusts for the size of the cash flow. However, to evaluate all the parameters need experts' help, which is not affordable by all organizations. The next tool for analyzing risk in a project is probability distribution approach. It is the concept of probability distribution for incorporating risk in the evaluating capital budgeting proposals. The probability distribution of cash flows over time provides valuable information about the expected value of return, and the dispersion of the probability distribution of possible returns, which helps in taking accept, reject decisions of the investment decision. The application of this theory in analyzing risk in capital budgeting depends upon the behavior of the cash flows being independent and dependent. A look now at the independent. The assumption that cash flows are independent over time signifies that future cash flows are not affected by the cash flows in the preceding or following years. When the cash flows in one period depends upon the cash flows in previous periods, they are referred to as dependent cash flows. On the other hand, for the dependent, if cash flows are perfectly correlated, the behavior of cash flows in all periods is alike. This means that if the actual cash flow in one year is standard deviation to the left of its expected value, cash flows in other years will also be standard deviations to the left of their respective expected values. Cash flows of all years are linearly related to one another. The expected value and the standard deviation for the net present value will consider when cash flows are perfectly correlated. Now, let us discuss the decision tree analysis. In this method, a decision tree is constructed to give a better presentation of related information connected with an investment proposal. Investment decisions in practice are quite complicated, especially because the outcomes are not certain. Further, the projections of the future are dependent upon the outcomes of the present. To be more specific, the net cash outflows of the second year may be dependent on the net cash outflows of the first year. The net cash outflows of the first year itself is dependent on certain event, and this makes all the future events as well as their expected consequences dependent on each other. A decision tree here helps to simplify the decision making process. For example, as a project head hypothetically develops a decision tree for a new venture of your construction company with suitable assumptions and profitability related to it. Being an investor, provide critical evaluation of the current project which is needed to close down. Let's see the steps to drafting of a report with concrete fact and figure to your BOD with utilization of decision tree method. The steps in precise sequence begin with defining the problem, exploring all the alternatives available, followed by estimating the expected NPV of each alternative, thereby after that assigning probability to each alternative, calculating joint probability of each alternative, then evaluating each one of them. forming the tree for the entire life of the project year-wise, and finally choosing the best option. Now let's look at the advantages. It is helpful to analyze situations where sequential decision making in the face of risk is involved. The decision tree analysis is a simple tool to apply. It is a step-by-step approach which helps the analyst understand what can be done at each point of the decision. It is a better presentation of information related to any investment proposal. Now for the limitations. It requires a huge amount of information before it can be applied, and it becomes difficult to apply the method to a new or green project. Also, it becomes difficult to apply where the firm has very little information on how the market will respond to it. When investment targets are gradually met over a period of time, instead of investing in well-defined stages, decision tree is not easy to construct and apply. Let us end our discussion with the real option analysis of project termination and abandonment. Real options exist when managers can influence the size and riskiness of a project's cash flows by taking different actions during the project's life. And also, real option analysis incorporates typical net present value, that is the NPV budgeting analysis, with an analysis for opportunities resulting from managers' decisions. Some examples of real options are investment timing options, abandonment or shutdown options, growth or expansion options, and finally flexibility options. Now, what are the issues with abandonment options? The company does not have the option to delay the project. The company may abandon the project after a year if the customer has not adopted the product. If the project is abandoned, there will be no operating costs incurred nor cash inflows received in future. Is it reasonable to assume that the abandonment option does not affect the cost of capital? No, it is not reasonable to assume that the abandonment option has no effect on the cost of capital. The abandonment option reduces risk and therefore reduces the cost of capital. Now let us see, when do projects terminate? Termination rarely has much impact on technical success or failure, but has a huge impact on other areas, while the residual attitudes towards the project, the client, senior management and the project team, and the success of subsequent projects. So, it makes sense to plan and execute termination with care. Upon successful completion, when the organization is no longer willing to invest the time and cost required to complete the project, given its current status and expected outcome. The most common reasons why projects are terminated are low probability of technical or commercial success, low profitability or market potential, the damaging cost growth, change in competitive factors or the market needs, irresolvable technical problems, higher priority of competing projects, scheduled delays. The concept will become clear with the flow chart that you see on the screen. The 4 varieties of project termination. Termination by extinction, where the project has successfully completed or it has failed. Natural passing or termination by murder. Either way, project substance ceases, but much work needs to be done. The administrative organizational termination by addition. The project becomes a formal part of the parent organization, people, material, facilities, transition. The example of Nucor, the termination by integration. The project assets are distributed to or absorbed by the parent. Termination by starvation. And withdrawal of life support can save face, avoid embarrassment, evade admission of defeat. It is time to conclude today's session. Let us summarize what we have just discussed. Risk refers to the chance that some unfavorable event might occur. No project should be undertaken unless the expected rate of return is ascertained. In an environment of uncertainty, business operates and managers can never be sure about what might happen in the future. The various types of risk encountered during project financing are project risk, credit risk, commercial risk, etc. Different methods helpful to the evaluator to enable them to take sound and wise decisions based on their data and evaluation techniques. In this way, in-depth understanding of the project reduces chances for termination and abandonment. With this, we wrap up today's session. Thank you so much.